Equaling the playing field for all roles, huh? I like the progressive approach here. Very smooth, Riot. Maybe games won't be as much of a mid-lane diff as before. What's going on, Summoners? My name is Dan, and I'm happy to welcome you back to another Pro Guides video. Right here, right now, we're gonna run you guys through some major game-changing mid-lane nerfs coming to a Summoner's Rift near you. Riot told us before that they've been working on some balance changes intended to bring all roles in line with each other. Not every role is intended to have the same amount of agency over games, but we were told in a previous developer post that mid-laners were a bit too strong, while marksmen were underperforming. Riot has taken action to fix the latter issue, and now they've got some plans for the former. Mid-laners are getting nerfed, and we're not talking about champion balance changes either. The systems themselves are up for some reform. Make sure to check out our description link to join our Discord and subreddit, by the way. We want to connect with you guys as much as we can, but nevertheless, let's get started with the video. Alright, it's always been subjective which role is the strongest, but high elo players, pro players, and even Riot Games themselves have come to the conclusion that mid lane has held a little too much power for far too long. Thus, the mid lane itself is actually receiving a nerf very soon. These changes are expected to ship out on patch 10.13, but they are highly tentative. First, let's talk about what they are. Mid lane will now spawn 4 cannons every 4 waves, instead of 3 for the first 15 minutes of the game. In addition to this, mid minions will move slightly slower than before. The goals of these changes are to lower the amount of income mid laners receive, and also to make clearing waves and roaming a little bit less effective than before. What Riot is trying to accomplish with these changes is to make it so that it's a little bit harder for mid laners to execute the good old clear mid and roam somewhere strategy. Essentially, by syncing up the minion waves of all 3 lanes, it's going to be a lot harder for mid laners to roam than before. However, they're not going to get punished any less or more if their opponents choose to stay in lane. The biggest change is that they won't have the slight tempo advantage they had on side lanes. Here's how it works. Let's say all 3 lanes have their minions meet with each other. Mid lane, at the moment, has their minions arrive faster. If a mid laner with strong wave clear immediately clears out a wave, they can then start their roam towards the side lane. By this time, a side laner's minions might have just met the enemy team's minions, and thus, a roaming mid laner has gotten an enormous head start on that gank attempt. When mid lane minions arrive later, they can still clear the waves and roam, but who's to say that a side laner hasn't done the same already? Roaming will still be just as rewarding, but it's going to be harder to accomplish. On top of this, the fact that mid laners are receiving less cannon minions in their lane means that they'll have less experience and gold than they did before. Honestly, this is game breaking. If you play the mid lane and understand some fundamentals, you probably already understand as you're hearing this that there's a lot of adjustments you're going to have to make. Typically, mid laners like to recall when the next minion wave is a cannon wave. The reason for this is that these waves take a little bit longer to clear. The tankier siege minions aren't as easily killed, even by spells. If you're fast enough, you can usually make it back into lane to catch the whole wave, or only missing the cannon minion at worst. Recalling when the next wave is a normal wave allows the enemy mid laner to instantly clear it, denying you an entire minion wave if you choose to base at a bad time. Timing your recalls is always subjective. Some players like to greed and wait until they can make a huge purchase. Other times, players value consecutive small purchases to maximize their health and map pressure. Regardless, less cannon minion waves means that optimal recall timers are going to be much less frequent during the laning phase. Players are going to have to call their junglers more often to catch or freeze their waves when they're forced out of lane. There are some secondary effects of these mid lane nerfs though, and now's a good time to talk about them. I believe, personally, that these nerfs will make the top lane and jungle a little bit stronger than before. Junglers are going to have to help mid laners more often, and thus they'll be able to catch more experience while doing so. The biggest change for junglers, however, is that since the first minion wave will arrive later than before, mid laners will actually be able to leash for them. Whether it's helping them clear raptors, wolves, blue buff, or red buff, they'll now be able to have 3 teammates help them on the bottom side or 2 on the top side. Oh, the nostalgia. Another change is that when junglers want to late invade, they'll have an extra member able to join them. Usually junglers would only bring a top laner for a late invade, since mid laners would sacrifice too much if they join the fiesta. Expect more 3v3 showdowns at the minute 30 mark. With the mid lane cannon minions spawning less frequently, this means that top laners will be the highest level champions in any given game, at least in theory. Bot laners and supports are also going to be stronger relative to the game since mid laners are weaker. In a sense, these mid lane nerfs are indirect buffs to every other role. Alright, that's going to conclude this video. Thanks so much for watching, guys. We hope you enjoyed it and found